How's it going, everyone? It's Blake here from ChessPathways.com, and today we're going to be discussing the Catalan Opening. The Catalan generally begins as a Queen's Gambit declined, so White's going to play d4, d5, c4, Black plays e6 here to decline the Gambit, a very popular move, knight f3, knight f6, and now the Catalan is characterized by this early g3 here from White. In the Catalan, Black might have more incentive now to take on c4 than they might in a normal Queen's Gambit, because it's not going to be very easy for this bishop to just pick up that pawn after simply, say, e3 and bishop takes c4, because this bishop's really already committed to this g2 square. That said, if this pawn leaves its post here on d5, this bishop's going to have a very nice diagonal here on the long diagonal, and this pawn could still be picked up pretty easily from White in a lot of lines with moves like knight to a3, or queen to c2, or queen to a4, just trying to pick up that pawn on c4. So in light of that, Black has two main general options here against the Catalan. We can have a closed Catalan, where Black does not take here on c4. Black tries to keep their pawn here on d5, this strong point in the center, and the center doesn't get opened up very fast. Or we can have the open Catalan, where Black does take on c4, either with the idea of trying to hold on to that extra pawn, or just trying to clear some open lines there, possibly striking later with a move like c5, and trying to get some counterplay going. So let's start by looking at the closed Catalan. Black will often play bishop e7 here if they're not going to take on c4. White can play bishop g2, castle, castle. Again, it's not too late for Black to switch to an open Catalan by taking here on c4. And also, of course, White doesn't have to castle here on move 6. White could simply defend the pawn now and take that option away from Black. But White's usually happy to play either option, either the closed or the open Catalan. But here after castles, Black can simply play c6 if they're not going to take here on c4. And now we're definitely in a closed Catalan here. White's going to play queen c2, finally defend this pawn, and the game is going to build up kind of slowly for the time being, although eventually one side or the other is going to strike at the center. By the way, the reason White does have to defend that pawn after c6 is that after this pawn comes to c6, a lot of Black's threats become more credible here to take on c4 because they can be backed up with b5. So White does have to defend this pawn eventually, and usually after c6, White does finally play queen to c2. So both sides are going to develop some pieces. Black can play knight b to d7, White can play knight b to d2. This knight will sometimes come to c3, but it's kind of nice to stay out of the way of the queen's line of sight here to the c4 pawn. And this knight also helps prepare an e4 advance from either d2 or c3. So here Black can play b6. That's really the most natural square for this bishop, is to put it on b7, where it can also try to oppose White's influence along this long diagonal. And now White could play more slowly here with a move like b3. We can take a look at that briefly. b3, bishop b7, bishop b2, rook to c8, trying to eye this queen. And White could strike at the center now finally with e4, but Black can meet that with c5. And now what looked like a very calm positional maneuvering game a couple moves ago has become very tactical. There's all kinds of pawn tension here in the center, and both sides have to calculate carefully. But often here after b6, White will not kind of waste any time here with b3. White can just play e4 right away, trying to take even more space, and trying to take advantage of Black's kind of passive approach here with c6 and b6. So here Black could take this pawn on e4, that is possible, but now after knight takes e4, the position is considered pretty pleasant here for White. For example here, if Black played bishop b7, a very natural move, White will often just play rook to d1, and this is really going to discourage Black from making any pawn breaks here in the center, because this rook would eye the queen. If the queen came to c7, then bishop f4 would come to harass that queen further possibly. And this is the exact kind of position a lot of players want when they play the Catalan. There's no immediate winning tactics here for White. There's no fancy tricks. White simply has an enduring positional advantage, and they can build up slowly here on the center and on the queen side, and it's hard for Black to get counterplay. Just as one example, Black lost a game very quickly here by playing c5, trying to give a discovered attack here to the knight, but White can simply trade that knight away. Knight takes f6. And now, how does Black really respond to this? G takes f6 looks really ugly. Knight takes f6 would allow d takes c5 with tempo on the queen. And after bishop takes f6, then knight g5 turned out to be very strong, unleashing this bishop along the diagonal and threatening checkmate here on h7. So instead, coming back here after b6, when White plays e4, Instead of taking here on e4, black sometimes just keeps on developing. They just play bishop b7, and of course this does allow white to play e5 and grab a space advantage, but black can try to tolerate this. After, for example, knight to e8, c takes d5, c takes d5, we have the same pawn structure here in the center that you might recognize from the advanced variation of the French defense or the Caro-Kann defense, where white has the d4 and e5 pawns and black has the light squared pawns here in the center. And white's most popular move here is a great example of the principle of overprotection that we know from Nimzowitsch, to play here rook to e1. So why does white put a rook here on this closed file here? Well, it discourages black from playing the f6 pawn break, trying to liberate black's position, because now if black were to play f6, of course this e-pawn could be very vulnerable on this open e-file. So again, a great illustration of what white's looking for in the closed Catalan here. Nothing fancy going on, no flashy tactics, no checkmating attacks. White simply has an enduring positional advantage. Before we move on to the open Catalan, I want to mention one other possibility here from black. We looked at playing bishop e7. Sometimes black will play here bishop to b4 check, and after white plays bishop to d2, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to make this exchange. This is black's good bishop, because their pawns are on light squares, and that would simply help white to develop a piece with something like queen to d2 or knight takes d2. Black often plays this move with the intention of simply retreating to e7. So at first glance, this looks pretty ridiculous, right? Why would you play bishop b4 check, let white develop a piece, and then just come to e7 when you could have came to e7 right away? Well, black's trying to argue that this bishop is kind of misplaced here on d2. It's in the way of white's development. This knight often wants the d2 square. This queen might want to be able to watch over this d4 pawn in some lines. So black might induce white to play a move like bishop d2, and we can see how the game could go from here. Bishop g2, castle, castle, c6, queen c2, knight b to d7. Very similar to what we've seen before, but now white can't play knight to d2 here, so they kind of have to move this bishop again. White can play bishop f4 here, trying to actively develop that bishop. But we can see black has some ways to try to make use of exploiting this. After, for example, b6, rook d1, bishop b7, knight c3, some very normal developing moves here. In this particular line, white did choose to put the knight on c3 instead of d2. But here, black often will take this c4 pawn. And even though it looks like white can win this pawn back pretty easily with knight to d2, this is a very common idea in the Catalan. It's not easy for black to defend this pawn, because of course b5 can be met with knight takes b5. There's a pin on the long diagonal. But black wanted to clear the d5 square so they could play knight to d5 here, gaining a nice little tempo here on the bishop. White gets to win their pawn back, but now after knight takes f4, g takes f4, white's pawn structure has been slightly compromised, although white could argue that they now have a better grip of the e5 square, and white could look to make use of that as well. I just wanted to make you aware that this bishop b4 check followed by bishop e7 option isn't as crazy for black as it looks. Alright, we've covered the closed Catalan. Let's start taking a look at the open Catalan, and there's definitely some exciting possibilities here for both sides. So here after g3, black can simply take here on c4, and white could try to play more Queen's Gambit decline style and just play something like e3 and bishop takes c4, but they'd really just be getting a worse version of a lot of Queen's Gambit lines, because now this move g3 wouldn't make any sense. So white generally plays bishop g2, goes into the open Catalan, and let's take a look at black's ideas here. One idea is to play knight c6 here for black, which develops a piece, adds an attacker here to the d4 pawn, and also gives black some ideas to try to defend this c4 pawn if black tries to play, if white tries to play queen a4 to pick it up. So let's take a look. After queen a4, white's trying to pick up this c4 pawn, but black can now play bishop b4 check and get in that queen's way. And after the natural bishop d2, white's threatening to win a piece here on b4, but black can just play knight to d5, and for the time being, black is holding on to that pawn. After bishop takes b4, knight takes b4, white can castle now, make sure there's no tricks here with knight c2 in some line. But now black can play rook to b8, threatening to play b5 and really solidify their extra pawn here. White should play knight c3 to prevent this, but black can double down on this idea, playing a6 here, really trying to get this b5 move in, and getting a very nice pawn chain here built on the queen side. Of course, that would always be dangerous, because that would make this bishop even stronger here. This bishop would be eyeing this knight that would be a little bit loose without this b-pawn. But white definitely needs to make something happen here, because white does not want to let black just consolidate that extra pawn. So knight e5 is the normal move, just opening up this bishop and kind of double attacking this knight here on c6, trying to break the coordination here between the black pieces. Black could just castle here, that's one line. One line that I found interesting was playing queen takes d4. That looks like a very greedy move, attacking this e5 knight and kind of forcing white's hand. And the following forcing line goes knight takes c6, white takes on c6 again, wrecking the black pawn structure. B takes c6, queen takes c6, and if the bishop blocks, then the a6 pawn might fall, and white would get a very strong passed a pawn. So the main line goes queen d7, queen takes c4, and for the time being, material equality is restored. I guess black could take this b2 pawn, but it looks pretty dangerous to play that without getting castled. White's ready to start playing rook d1 and kicking the black pieces around a little bit. So that was one line in the open Catalan, stemming from this knight c6 option. Another option here for black is to play c5. And this idea is known from some openings like the Queen's Gambit Accepted, where black takes on c4 not to try to hold on to their extra pawn, but just to buy some time to be able to strike at the center and try to tear down white's space advantage. So let's take a look. White does not have to take here, of course. That would allow black to possibly exchange these queens and stop white from castling. So instead castles, knight c6, just adding some pressure here. Queen a4, white's trying to win their pawn back here on c4. Black could try to win a pawn, but of course this would be very dangerous. A very common Catalan idea rears its head here. Knight e5, and this bishop springs to life. This knight adds to the attack on the c6 knight, and this could be very dangerous for black. So instead, after queen a4, black will often play bishop d7, just shutting down this pin here on this knight. White gets to win their pawn back here on c4, but now black can expand here with b5. And of course, if this queen were to take this pawn, this knight would get to play knight takes d4 with a discovery here. So white generally wants to avoid that. Queen to d3 can be played, and now rook to c8. So that's one way to try to neutralize the pressure of this very strong bishop here on g2. Black basically just vacated everything from that diagonal. They got rid of the b pawn here, they put it on b5, and then they moved the rook away from the a8 square. And of course, they dealt with the pin there on that knight. So materials equal again, white got their pawn back, but black used the meantime to strike at the center. Black has some nice pressure here building on the queen side. The only thing black has to really watch out for is the fact that white's already castled, and black is still a couple moves away from getting their king to safety. So that covers the c5 line here after bishop g2. I'll just cover one more option. One very ambitious try from black is to play a6 here, just basically trying to make sure they get this b5 move in and really solidifying this extra pawn. If white goes ahead and just castles here, black's going to play b5 and continue on with their idea. And once again, this is always a little bit dangerous. You're really making this bishop very, very strong when you open up its diagonal. White's going to play a move I'm sure you can predict by now. White's going to play knight e5 and really open up this light-squared bishop. Black's only real move here is to play knight to d5 and try to block that bishop off. And now white's going to start trying to tear down this pawn chain that black has built. a4 can be played. White's threatening to open up the a-file here, and there's a pin here on the a-file, so bishop b7 should be played. But now b3 can be played here from white, and it's really hard for black to maintain their pawns here. If black, for example, took here on b3, then after queen takes b3, it's not so easy to see how to handle this threat to the b5 pawn. c6 would really hem in this light-squared bishop, and with the way lines are opening here, it could be dangerous for black to keep falling behind in development. So instead here, after b3, black sometimes plays a very ambitious move here, c3. Just trying to keep lines closed and getting a very strong passed pawn here. Of course, it looks like this fails tactically, because white can just play e4, kick this knight away, and then win a pawn back here while they develop a piece. So that looks like this is going to be a disaster for black. But black has an idea. They're willing to sacrifice a piece. Black's going to play b4 here to cement this pawn here on c3. And white gets to win a piece. But remember, black did already win a pawn earlier by accepting this Catalan Gambit and taking this c4 pawn. And black just won another pawn for this piece they sacrificed. So black has two pawns for a piece here. And this pawn on c3 is very strong. This knight can't really develop. And black is actually considered to have pretty good compensation here for a sacrificed piece. So this is definitely a very interesting way to play against the Catalan. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please make sure you click that link down in the description to visit chesspathways.com and get signed up there. It's totally free to join, and it only takes 5 seconds. I'll send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking when you join our community, as well as access to a lot of exclusive content and contests. Thanks, and I'll see you there.